Question for you. The last 3 weeks, Jesus has talked about the same thing. Who knows the answer? Anyone? Should we reread all 3 Gospels again? Okay, I'll give you a hint. If you like wine, you're going to know the answer. What has Jesus talked about the last 3 weeks? Vineyards, there you go. It's always amazing. All 3 Masses. No one's got the answer until I mention wine. Very interesting. Well, that's a good thing, I guess, because that means we're paying attention a little bit. So Jesus has talked about vineyards. And of course, today we hear about vineyards all over and over again. The first reading talks about the vineyard that is destroyed because it did not produce good fruit. So the landowner says, I'm just going to go ahead and destroy this vineyard. I'm not going to let it grow up at all. It gave bad fruit. Of course, at the end of Isaiah chapter 5, verses 1 through 5, what does it say? It says, of course, the vineyard refers to what? The vineyard of the Lord refers to the house of Israel. This, of course, is a responsorial psalm as well. The vineyard of the Lord is the house of Israel. So 3 straight weeks, Jesus has been giving parables using a vineyard, and the reason why is because the vineyard refers to the house of Israel. Of course, in Isaiah's time, we could say the prophecy was what? It did not produce good fruit, and so what happened? What happened was the landowner destroyed it, just like Jerusalem was destroyed. It went to ruin. The walls were broken down. We know all this happened at the temple of Jerusalem. All these things happened. So that prophecy, of course, came true. But in this parable today, what is Jesus talking about? Well, he's talking about, in a certain sense, in a real sense, not a certain sense, but a real sense, is that if we do not produce good fruit, what's going to happen to us? We'll be kicked out of the vineyard. We may even be destroyed. Let's take a closer look at this parable real quick. Of course, we see that the vineyard first has to be established. So in this, the landowner has to establish a vineyard. How does he do this? He planted a vineyard, put a hedge around it, dug a wine press in it, and built a tower. Then he leased it to tenants and went on a journey. In the back of our mind, we should be thinking, what else had to be created? This world that did in it. Adam and Eve. The Garden of Eden. The world. God created the world. And then he said to Adam and Eve, he said, be fruitful and multiply. You have dominion over the birds of the sky, the animals of the land, the fish in the sea, all these things. And you are my tenants. And I expect a produce out of you. What does God expect out of us? What is our main mission here on earth? Our main mission is to glorify and to serve the Lord. This is why at the end of Mass, once again I'll mention at the end of Mass, I always say, Deacon Hoffman might have a different one, but today he's going to say it. I know he is. Go in peace, glorifying the Lord by your life. This is our mission. This is a produce that we're supposed to do. Back to the parable. There is the landowner. He leaves. He gives it to the tenants to lease out. He sends his servants back. And the servant says, all we want is a produce that is rightly ours. Not everything, just the produce that we've agreed upon and leasing this out to you. And what do the tenants do? One they beat, another they stone, another they kill. Why? Why do they do this? Was it because they didn't have any produce to give? Not necessarily. That's not the reason why. The reason they beat these servants and killed them and everything like this was because they didn't want to give anything up that was theirs. Say, we don't want to. You don't deserve it. It's ours. So amazingly, the landowner says, I'm going to send more servants. And once again, they beat them. They stone them. They kill them. So finally, the landowner says, I will send my son. See, the servants, by the way, represent what? God sending prophets into this earth to prophesy, to tell, change your ways, give some good produce, do good work. And they kept on getting mistreated. Of course, with the capstone being John the Baptist, who was beheaded. So the landowner says, fine, I will send my son. They surely will respect him. We know what happens. They say, if we kill the son, then the landowner has no inheritance. And back then, if a landowner didn't have any inheritance to give to anyone, Then the tenants would take over the land. So they said, then this will be our land. Then we won't have anyone above us. Then we will be the ones in charge. And so they killed the son. It's interesting in Matthew that he points out they killed the son outside of the vineyard. Same in Matthew's account of Jesus dying. He wasn't killed in Jerusalem, was he? He was killed outside the walls of Jerusalem. And this, of course, is what Jesus is talking about in the parable. So in the parable, Jesus asked the Pharisees and the scribes, what should happen to these wretched landowners? And they answer them themselves, which is also interesting in Matthew. And they say, he will put those wretched men to a wretched death and lease his vineyard to other tenants who will give him the produce at the proper times. This, of course, is true with God. All what God desires of us is what? Is to serve him, is to glorify him. But so often we are like the tenants. We say, no, I don't want to. I want to hold on to everything myself. I don't want to have a God. I don't need to serve anyone but myself. And so we're selfish with our times, our talents, our treasures. We're selfish saying, I don't want to give anything. We're lazy. And in a certain sense, we say, I want to be God. I don't want anyone in charge of me. So we say, I'm not going to serve God. I'm just going to float through this earth and see where it leads me. Well, where is it going to lead us if we just float through this earth? Not to remain in the vineyard, that's for sure, but rather to a wretched death, which we do not desire. You know, the amazing thing I find in this parable is how generous the landowner is. Imagine that you owned a field and you leased it out. And you sent your servants, those people right below you, to go and get the produce. And they killed those servants. What would you do? Would you send other servants? I know what I would do. If it was this day and age, I would call the police right away. I probably even want, them to get punished in a severe way. But instead, our landowner, because it's a parable and it's always meant to be shocking, the landowner says, no. I'll send other servants. There must be a misunderstanding. They probably don't get it. So I'll send other servants. And then once again, they mistreat them. Now for sure you're calling the police. Now for sure you kick them out. Now you want revenge. But not this landowner, does he? Not God, right? Instead, they send their son. Why? The reason why is because God desires for us to have life. We have an amazing God. We have such a generous God. An amazing, generous, loving God who desires for us to remain with him. And he will do anything for us. He did so much for us that he gave his only son for us. He desires for you and me and all of us to remain in his vineyard. Yes, here on this earth, but also in eternal life. We have such a generous God who is patient with us, who cares for us. And yes, he expects us to serve him. But how much more has he done for us? He created the world for us. He gave us life. Because of him, we can breathe, we can smile, we can stay awake. All of these things. How amazing this is. And so when we serve him, yes, in a certain sense, it's out of obedience, because we know this is what we're called to do, because he is our King, Christ the King, all of these things. But even more importantly, the reason that we should serve God is out of generosity. Out of the love, the generosity he has to us. We should desire to serve him and to thank him every single day. Without him, we're nothing. But he set up this world not for himself, but for us, so that we could experience love, so that we could experience what life is all about. My brothers and sisters, in this parable, I hope, I pray, I desire that we leave here today with a renowned sense of thankfulness to God for how generous he is, how patient he is, how loving he is. Once again, the temptation can be saying, I don't need a God. I'm my own God. I can serve my own needs. But But God is better than you. He's definitely better than me. We have a God that will do anything for you. And this is why we serve him. This is why we give him everything we have of ourselves. All of our good works we hand over to him, serving him day after day, year after year, our whole life. Why? Because it's him himself who gave us life. And because of this, we serve him, we thank him, and we love him.